What's up, my wizards? It's Deb from Mtg. We like you to magic, and today we're going to look at a deck that takes guts to play, but it's got good bones. Here's Rakdos Skeletons. Oh, and yeah, there's going to be puns this video, but don't let it get under your skin. I'm just trying to tickle your funny bone, and I hope you find it humorous. Oh, and to add to the spoop, for me at least, it's actually a dark and stormy night as I record this. There's been tornado warnings in my area, so kind of scary, but I'm not rattled. I'm not spineless. We're going to get through this together. So let's talk about skeletons. There's not too many in the format to choose from, but some of the skeletons we do have right now aren't too bad. Our skull set has a skill set, so let's get to it. Now, that said, though, the first creature I have to show you isn't actually a skeleton, but skeleton's in the text box, so there you go. 4 copies of Death Baron, so we have to do that. This is actually our biggest skeleton payoff. And even though it itself is not a skeleton, it is kind of the backbone of the deck, you know. The Red Baron will come down, give all our skeletons a little pizza party, boost them a little bit, and give them Death Touch, which is actually super important too. But on to the skeletons that you were promised at the beginning of this video. We're going to play 4 copies of Gutta Bones in the deck, 4 copies of Reassembling Skeleton, 4 Skeleton Archer, and 2 copies of Bone Daddy up here at the top of the curve. It's nice to have a big fat flyer to help finish off games some of the time. Don't have a whole lot of flying action in the deck, so I will take at least a couple of copies of this. And if you can get it back even once, it can be game-breaking sometimes. Occasionally, you'll just attack for the win with this, but sometimes you just need it to hold down the sky until you can combo off. We'll talk about how to do that in just a second, but on to our other skellies. We got Skeleton Archer in the deck, which doesn't look super impressive, but if it follows a Death Baron, it's basically a bigger Ravenous Chupacabra. Nothing wrong with that. Whatever you ping just dies, because Skeleton Archer will have Death Touch if you have a Baron in play. Aside from that, though, even if you don't have a Baron in play, sometimes this will kill things. The occasional Terramander, Siren Storm Tamer, Mistcloaked Herald. There are all kinds of 1-toughness creatures this can actually just shoot down. White 1-drops and Mono Elves and such, so this will be relevant on turn 4 some of the time, even if you didn't play Baron. Later on in the game, it can also trigger Spectacle for your Gutter Bones, which will be important. We've got a couple of different ways in the deck to get Spectacle aside from just attacking, and we can trigger it relatively reliably, so it shouldn't be too hard to get Gutter Bones back. This is an effective 1-drop to start the game off with, too, and it's a really good way to curve. You know, if you go Gutter Bones on 1, Skeleton 2-drop like Reassembling Skeleton on turn 2 into Death Baron, you've actually got a pretty formidable team. And speaking of Reassembling Skeleton, it's actually a really important combo piece in the deck, but it can also just chump block for us all day. We don't have to get Spectacle triggered to get this back from our graveyard over and over and over, and it can get really annoying, especially when it gets Death Touch from Death Baron. But what was that combo I was talking about a second ago? Well, we're playing 4 copies of Desecrated Tomb in the deck, as well as 3 copies of Makeshift Munitions. Well, Munitions will set up a loop where we can just sacrifice Reassembling Skeleton or Gutter Bones and just get them back over and over, continue to sacrifice them and take stuff down, or just hit players for damage. Either way, pretty sweet way to spend your mana. You always have a sink in the late game if you have a Munitions and a Reassembling Skeleton set up, and that'll deal a lot of damage over the course of a couple of turns. Meanwhile, Desecrated Tomb is giving you a bat every time you pull a Reassembling Skeleton or a Gutter Bones out of your graveyard. It just leads to a skeleton of value, Waka Waka. But seriously, after just a few revolutions of this loop, you'll have 2-3 bats out. Maybe you'll take down one of your opponent's creatures or just bolt them in the face effectively. So there's a lot to be said for this loop. You don't even necessarily have to attack to win the game. You just get a bunch of bats that'll hold down the air for you while you keep getting munitions loops, and eventually you can just finish the game off that way. Now, yeah, that is cute, but it's an admittedly slow and kind of mana-hungry clock, so how can we best speed it up? Well, it's called Judy, and Judith, the Scourge Diva, is still one of my favorite cards from Ravnica Allegiance. Super excited to get to mess around with this thing again. Not only does this also anthem all of our skeletons, so we got Death Baron and this, you know, we get the 2 of them out, and suddenly all of our skeletons are pretty big, no matter how small they started, so that's sweet. But if we are sacrificing things to makeshift munitions, or just losing skeletons in the normal course of combat, then we're dealing a little bit of extra damage to whatever target we may happen to choose, and more damage is always good. Now, the last creature in the deck is the 3 copies of Ravenous Chupacabra to keep the parade of horrors going. This is neither a skeleton nor a zombie for Death Baron to boost, but we are playing Judith in the deck, so I want to play as many creatures as we can get in here, but I also want to be able to take care of other big creatures on the other side of the table, and Ravenous Chupacabra fulfills sort of both of those ends, and it helps us fill out the 4-drop slot too. We'll finish it off with a couple of spells here. We're going to play 3 copies of Carnival Carnage, a card that looks like it only has narrow interactions, or I guess marrow interactions, but this can actually kneecap, that's a good one, mono blue strategies, and a bunch of other stuff. I've already talked about all the creatures that only have 1 toughness. People are playing right now. White 1-drops, a bunch of blue 1-drops that are in one of the most important decks in the entire format, and also random Lawn War Elves and stuff. So just the ability to take out random, like, 1 toughness guys, pretty good for just the 1 mana. Plus you can trigger Spectacle for your Gutter Bones. Like, there's some pretty good stuff to like on just the first half of this card, and it's really, really easy to cast no matter what lands you started the game with. So that's pretty sweet. But the second half, awesome as well. This is pretty decent when resolved against mono blue too, but especially good against mid-range decks like Sultai, and especially too, obviously, control decks like Esper. It's just not really a deck this card is bad against right now, outside of a handful of different things. But even against decks like Nexus and Reclamation, there's a lot of play on a card like this. And again, triggers Spectacle for your Gutter Bones, or just deals like the last 3 damage that you need. Like, it turns out that Lightning is a pretty good card, but so is Lightning Strike. We're just going to play 2 copies of this. There's a bunch of different ways you could fill this slot. Cast Down, Lava Coil, and I would understand those choices. Even things like Moment of Craving, and I briefly considered Vicious Offering, that's a spicy inclusion, yes. But in the end, I figured Lightning Strike's probably the best thing here. This can take out Wild Growth Walkers, pretty much every creature in mono blue outside of Tempest Djinn, pretty much any early game creature you might have to worry about and just get off the board ASAP. Well, Lightning Strike can usually do that for you, but it can also trigger Spectacle when you absolutely need to do that, and none of those other removal spells can. Now, we're running 24 lands in this pile, and that actually looks like a land or two too many maybe, but again, the deck is really mana hungry between Reassembling Skeleton, Makeshift Munitions activations, and Gutter Bones. 2 mana to bring it back too. The deck is really, really hungry, especially when you're going through those loops. You want to do more than just like 1 a turn. So the deck needs a fair amount of lands, but we also don't want to flood, so I think 24 is right. And here's just sideboard. Pretty obvious stuff in here, honestly. We got Duress and Drill Bit to deal with control decks and just rip important cards out of their hand. This works equally as well against mono blue tempo, by the way. You want to side in all of this hand destruction that you possibly can, because these are just all-star cards against any deck that's trying to disrupt the tempo of the game or dictate the pace of the game like a control deck. We've also got the 4th copy of Carnival Carnage in there against those mono blue tempo decks, and again, the control decks. It's just that good against them, so we'll play all 4 copies in specific matchups. But we've also got Theater of Horrors in there for longer games, and again, against control decks. We need a lot of options against Esper in games too, and other control decks for that matter, so I want to out-card advantage them. Theater of Horrors is great for that, and can just win the game on its own if you get enough activations and enough turns with it, so play that card. But against aggro decks, we've also got Plague Mare and Ravenous Chupacabra. Just want to have a 4th copy of Chupacabra to take out big stuff if they're playing a lot of big stuff, but I am going to play Plague Mare, because again, I want to play as many creatures as we can in what is in some ways a Judith deck, and against the decks that we care about beating with sweepers, things like mono white aggro and blue white aggro, mono blue tempo. They play a lot of 1 toughness creatures, so a Plague Mare is just as good, or in most cases a lot better, than a card like Golden Demise. And here's your power rankings right here. A surprising final score of 62. I'm just as surprised as you are. But the deck does have some removal, not just in spell form, but also in its creatures. We got Ravenous Chupacabra, and once we get a Death Baron down, all of our dudes get Death Touch, or most of our dudes get Death Touch, and that can make a huge difference in combat. We got a lot of stuff going for us. If the game does go long like we kind of want it to, we end up getting a bunch of bats and a lot of damage off of Makeshift Munitions. So we've kind of got some early game aggression especially if we get both of our Anthem effects down. Again, our dudes get pretty big. We just attack for the win, sometimes take to the sky with a Bone Dragon, or, Judith goes pretty well with a few bats once we get the loop going with Desecrated Tomb. So we can attack for the win, but if the game goes long, we have a built-in mana sink that just combos off and will win us the game if we can establish a stalemate. So that kind of has a lot going for it. It looks weak, but not so much, it turns out. And I'm not fibbing you. Something fibula. Anyway, if you like a spicy deck, Bon appetit. This thing is actually not so bad, you know? It looks rinky-dink, and the combo is a little bit cute at times, especially when faced up against some of the really, really good decks at the top tier of this standard. There's a few of them, but this thing can pull through, especially against some of the better decks, you know, Mono Blue, Esper. We've got a lot of options, especially in Game 2 and 3, to help even up those matchups, even if we're paying a lot less for our deck than they are. So try this thing out, and if you wanted to, do just that, then make sure you hit that first link in the description and go over to TCG Play and sponsor my content. They're also where you're going to get this deck for as low as like $50 right now. Not too bad for a twist on a Rakdos mid-range deck. And of course, let me know how you felt about this one in the comments section down there. I know you might have a bone to pick with me about a couple of things. You know, we didn't play all the skeletons in the format. There are a few more that we could actually work in if we wanted to, but I think they're kind of really bad. We don't have to resort to cards that bad. We're resorting to kind of some bad cards, but not that bad. So, but let me know if you got anything to say to me down there in the comments section. How would you have done it different? Why am I building skeletons at all? It's fun. Stay out of my business. But in any case, I'm pretty sure that's it for this one. So if you would please, just on your way out, before you hit the lights, do the YouTube stuff for me. Like the video. That takes no time really on your part, but it helps me out tremendously. So if you want to do that, just in case my apartment gets blown away by this tornado, it's apparently coming any second now, barreling down upon me, then yeah, that would really help if you would like the video. Right, I guess. You can also subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit the bell for the notifications so you know when I put out stupid content like this. And I guess that's it. If you want to throw $1 in the Patreon, that would also help me rebuild after the coming disaster. But I hope none of this happens. I really do. But in any case, I think that that's pretty much it for now. So I'll leave a link in the description to the Patreon and to the deck and to all the stuff I usually leave links to, including videos and such. A wealth of information in the description box. But I think I'm done. So I will catch you cats later. I'm Deb from the place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind. Can you tell that I'm actually a little bit scared, baby? Can you tell that I'm like kind of slightly freaking out? It's gonna be okay though. It's gonna be okay. You're too cute for it not to be okay. It's gotta be all right. You're our protection. Look at you. Just you can't help it. You're completely asleep. A second ago you were freaking out, and now you're just totally okay with life. I want to be more like you.